Hello and welcome to Susan Stanley Stitch in Time. I am so pleased that you're joining me today. I have so many new subscribers and I want to thank you for joining me on this journey of stitching, and I'm so glad you're a part of it. And for those of you who have been with me for 2 years now, some of you, thank you so much. It's just been a joy and such a privilege to get to know you, to share this adventure we call stitching. It's just been lovely. So thank you for being here. I also want to thank you for those of you who watched my tutorial on hand piecing last time. I did a special edition just prior to this video, and a lot of you have expressed an interest, and I'm thrilled with that. Keep the questions and comments coming. I love the discussion. On this floss tube, I normally talk about cross stitch, quilting, textiles, and sewing notions from the past, and I share with you the projects that I've been working on. And today's episode will be much the same. I will share with you some of the comments and questions I've received. I've received some excellent comments and questions this time. I will share with you a quilt. I have a unique sampler to talk about. I have some progress on my projects, a finish, and then a couple of giveaways for my 2-year floss tube anniversary celebration. So let's get started. Comments, oh my goodness, great comments this time, so many of them. I had a question about the label from last episode's quilt. I failed to show you the label. This label's nothing exciting, and it is really good for me to show you because your labels don't have to be anything super exciting. Just a documentation of your stitching. So let me put that in right here. So as you can see, I was participating in the Joe Morton's Little Women's Club, and the block for that month was the birds in the air, which my quilt was composed of. And if you are not sure what I'm talking about, you'll want to pop over to my floss tube number 26 to see that quilt. I couldn't stick with the program. I had to go a little rogue, and as you can see, I created a much larger quilt using the birds in the air block in a variety of positions and angles. And so I wanted to also pay tribute to the initial inspiration, which was the class that I was taking, with the Joe Morton class. So that's what was on my label. That's important to note, I think, as well. I have had someone ask, how do I position my shapes for applique? Those of you who are not quilters, I would love to take you through this process. It's quite extensive. But just in the long and the short of it is I use a light box and I back baste, which means I draw the shape on the block shapes on the back of my fabric. I baste the shapes onto the front, trim them to size, and turn them under as I clip the basting threads away. Now that's a really quick explanation, but that's the gist of it. I also like to use needle turn, where I draw the shape onto the fabric of choice, like say a green leaf, leaving a 1/4 inch or less seam allowance, and then I begin taking my applique thread and I turn it under with my needle, or in some cases a toothpick, to get the desired result and the desired shape. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, hopefully at some point I'll make this more clear, but for people who are appliqueurs and quilters, they always like to know how do you approach your projects. So the next question was, why did I choose 1840 for this year's focus? And I have kind of addressed this a little bit in previous videos, but just to get a little deeper, 1840 in the United States was pre-industrial revolution. there was a lot going on. There was a lot of turmoil. There was inflation. There was a lot of discontent. The country was definitely in conflict with the politically and ideologically. That's not why I picked it, but as a result of that, maybe the textiles that were being produced and printed during that time are just some of my very favorites. So, you know, knowing about what was going on in the world or in the area, the country, sometimes influences what's being produced. I just happen to really like the prints from that time period, and that's why I picked it. I'm also stitching 2 samplers from that same time period, so I'm just trying to encompass and kind of involve myself completely in the 1840s. The next question was about the selvages that I talked about on fabrics, and I did want to share that in addition to what I shared in episode 26, there are fabrics now being produced with little admonishments and quotes. And let's see if we can get that to focus there. And you can see that sweet little quote. This is a Betsy Chutchin fabric from Mariah's Sky line. And that has actually brought selvages into yet another level of interest and collectability. And a few years ago, before I started doing floss tube, I was teaching a quilting class, and a few of my students got together and made me this tote bag, and it is all selvages pieced together, some with quotes, some with the color skew, some with the skew, the manufacturer's name, you know, all kinds of things. So just really fun. So selvages have definitely reached new heights in the fabric world. Next question, where did linen come from for early samplers? All right, so I did some reading and some digging, and linen, as far as I can tell, and from what I've read, and I would love to hear what you've read, if you've read have other information on this. It was woven all over the United Kingdom, in England and Scotland, and the linen then was sent to the Netherlands, to their bleaching fields. They would lay it out in these areas that received sunlight, and it would lighten the linen to become this beautiful color. Linen was used for clothing at that time, for bedding, for pillows, for tote bags, for seed bags, corsets, you name it. Linen was made into thread, and some was imported and some was home produced. In fact, the home produced was quite coarse and rough, but many homes had their own flax fields because they had to continually be replenishing the supply of flax woven into linen and made into cloth and sewn into clothing. So it was just a constant turnover. Large households actually had a quite elaborate system for turning over their household linens, so they would be used on a rotating basis to kind of give them equal time, and so not one piece was going to wear out sooner than another. Now, fine linen that we think of for samplers and for needlework came from Belgium, from what I read. And shop owners in America, the haberdashers, as they were called, they were really the experts on this imported linen. And I think this is probably addressing the question a little more. They would actually make big announcements that shipments were coming from Europe, and people, would come and to the shop, and whatever they needed, hopefully it was there. And there was always a demand for this linen coming from overseas. This fine needlepoint linen was what was used in the schools for the young girls to stitch on as part of their coursework. And at that time, there was an announcement that the linen was coming, but there was absolutely no branding or company associated with the linen products that were coming. Of course, some linen samplers were stitched on, house woven linen, but this fine linen was, of course, what was desirable. And I'm guessing that people who had the means and could afford it would use the finer linen for their clothing and bedding. I'm sure it was much more comfortable for their shift, for whatever they needed it for. So thank you. That was an excellent question. And I would like to explore, I love to explore, you know, how we access commodities, how we access, how people got the materials they needed to do what they needed to do, because they needed to make it. There weren't shops like we have to go to and get it right off the shelf. Next question is an excellent one, and I'm going to read it to you because I almost have to read it to be able to answer it. So let me read this to you. Hi, Susan. Could you please comment on what seems like an inconsistency to me? I value your opinion. Reproducers of samplers take care to choose thread colors from the back of the sampler, giving colors that are as the girl originally stitched and not faded by the passage of years. However, stitchers often choose mellowed or even grungy fabric colors because they feel this is consistent with the age of the sampler. Would it be more appropriate to choose fresh, clean linen colors to go with the unfaded thread colors? I feel even recommendations from charters often include this inconsistency. What are your thoughts on this? Thanks. Excellent question. And what I feel it boils down to is the aesthetic that the stitcher is trying to accomplish. So are you attempting as the stitcher to stitch something that looks like a faded, worn, time-worn antique that you saw in an antique store or on an auction site? Then you're going to want more faded, muted colors that you might see on the front. Do you want, however, you might want the experience of stitching your project in the manner that the person who originally stitched it experienced. The same vibrancy of colors, the same clean linen. What were they accessing and what were they using and how were they experiencing the project? You know, as a quilter, I started out and I wanted my quilts to look antique and I wanted them to be toned down. And over time, I've grown now to want to understand what was it that person saw in 1840 when they were going to the mercantile to purchase fabric. What were the colors like? How can I use them now with unfaded, untime worn, and experience what they experienced? So it really is absolutely personal preference. Now, many times charters will tell you they've charted this from the back or they've charted it from the front, and they will give you an alternate picture to go by. So if you want to tone it down to look like the front, you can adapt those colors based on what the charter shows you. Or if you want it to look like the back, you're always free to change your project to make it personal and make it your own. Excellent question. Thank you so much for asking. I hope that helps a little bit. It really is up to you. And then last of all, I did have a lot of people who really, really liked the beautiful chintz that I showed last video number 26, when I was talking about selvages. And I have this antique piece of chintz fabric here. And because of that, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about it. This is actually called a Portugese Stripe. And this chintz was printed for the Portuguese Brazilian market. It's identified by, got it upside down here, by uneven stripes. We've got wide stripes and thin stripes, narrower stripes. Often you'll see these, the rooster, the turkey, the birds, and this wildlife. If you are interested, and some of you sound like you are, in exploring more about and learning more about Portuguese Stripe, I'm going to link a blog post below. Actually, she has 7 blog posts on Portugese Stripe, and the blogger is Barbara Brackman. She's very well known in the fabric and textile and quilting world for her extensive research. Her articles are really, really well done, and she doesn't leave any stone unturned. So if you would like more information, I'll direct you over there. So I want to talk to you about this quilt that's hanging behind me today. Now, this is not a fully quilted quilt, so technically it's not a quilt yet, because when I first learned to quilt, I was told it's not a quilt until it's quilted. This is called a quilt top. It's just the pieces put together. It does not have the batting or wadding or backing. But I wanted to share it with you today. This is from a pattern that was just written by Karen Stiles, and the name of it is Bond Street. Now, I made this quilt when I moved to Washington State, trying to connect with people in a new place. I took a quilt class. This is a class, this quilt is kind of a Jane Austen era. So that early 1800s era, which I'm kind of focusing on this year. It moves into my 1840s that I'm really diving into. I wanted to limit my palette on this quilt to stay appropriate to the era, and I chose fabrics from about 1820 to 1840 that I had in my collection. And it includes some French General, which you might recognize because I know everybody loves their French General project bags, and a really special border fabric from Harriet Hargrave's collection that a dear friend gave me when I was moving from Texas. It's beautiful. I'll put a close-up in here of the quilt, just a still of the full quilt, and hopefully you can see the birds and the detail of the border. I wanted to use predominantly red and brown with shades of pink, and I really included toiles and chintz fabrics, stripes, and serpentines. And I know at first glance the brown is super dominant, but I love the way brown highlights the other colors around it, specifically the red, and it really gives them center stage. It's almost a backdrop. It softens the edges and it adds kind of an aged look. And so that was kind of the look I was after. And I am planning to have this quilted by a long armer. I have somebody picked out, and I'm really pleased with the way it turned out. And it will be an additional quilt in my bedroom to put at the foot of my bed on these cold winter nights, because it's been chilly up here in Seattle. We actually had snow this week. So I wanted to share that with you. So last week on Instagram, I shared this really interesting sneak peek at a piece of stitching that doesn't get a lot of attention, but really deserves a little bit, I believe. I found this in an antique mall, and of course I was drawn immediately to the cross stitch here, and you can see that it's on wool. And FF stitched this mending sampler in 1896. Now, cross stitch and marking samplers was very much a part of a young girl's life and growing up, but another part of her life and her learning was this mending concept. As I said on Instagram, tears and holes were just a fact of life, and it required careful, skilled patching to extend the life and use of garments and household textiles, because they were scarce. Textiles were scarce. You couldn't go out and buy a new pair of sheets, a new garment, a new flour sack. You had to repair what you had. You had to use what you had. And people took great lengths and care to do their repairs in a beautiful way that really enhanced the life of the item. And I was just so impressed with this, I believe, young girl's work. It's really exquisite and shows that she had a careful, thoughtful teacher. What is a mending sampler? Well, a mending sampler is in many ways like a marking sampler. It's a rite of passage, as you will, into the world of adult stitching. And stitching was just a part of life for women and some men, whether you liked it or not. Nothing was available easily to purchase. Things were not thrown away. They were used and used and used until they were rags. And then rags had a purpose too. So we'll talk about that. I want to show you some of this beautiful, I believe, beautiful patchwork that she has done, mending work that she has done. Now this is the little patch that I showed you on Instagram. And let me zoom in here, try to do this really slowly so you can see. Her work is so beautiful that you can barely see these stitches here where she made her mend. And upon examining this piece, I see that she used silk and linen thread to do her work. Now initially it looks like she stitched her squares together, leaving a very, very tiny seam allowance on some spots. But I wanted to show you the front and the back. So we have this circle that she patched a hole, mended a hole. We have this inset that she patched and did this beautiful little felled seam, and I'll show you the back here in a minute. This one is really impressive. She lined that stripe up beautifully. You'll be amazed at what she did on the back to make that happen. Now you probably wonder, why in the world did you purchase this? It's got holes and tears. It's just such a piece of history and life that we don't experience. I bet 99% of us don't mend our holes. We buy a new garment. Here's this one. She did a very rough basting hem around the edge. You can see here. This is also a mend that she did, and it's in the shape of a triangle, but she matched that fabric up exactly. You can't even tell almost from a distance. We have another inset repair with a beautiful seam that I'll show you in a minute. And then we have this one that's much like the triangle, where the pattern of the check is just matched up beautifully. Now let me turn this over. Let me move this out. So she's sharing her work with maybe a potential employer, maybe a parent. Okay, so this is what she did, and this is how she repaired and showed how her skills. All right, we'll zoom in here. We'll go back to the first one, which was the circular patch. Look at how she splayed out this outer fabric and the inner fabric, cutting deep seams, and did a whip stitch to patch that. I think it's amazing. This is a beautiful felled seam on linen. Nothing's going to unravel. This one is really intriguing to me. To match that stripe up perfectly, she took 4 melon shapes, and she even had to patch her patches. I don't know if you can see that thread right there. She patched her patches and set that in to make that fit. make that work. Here's her cross stitch on wool. I don't know how she put the pattern for FF 1896 onto the wool. I don't know how she transferred that or if she just eyeballed it. I don't really know at all. And this wool was actually patched onto another piece of wool. I couldn't even tell from the front. Some beautiful corner patches she did. And look at how she did her checkerboard. Her work is just amazing. This is left open. This is left open. This is where she stitched. So she's taken the square and the patch and stitched and then opened the seam. Really interesting. And then she's done the same here. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's a part of what was going on at the same time that samplers were being stitched, at the same time patchwork was being patched, or put together, pieces were being put together to make quilts. I want to direct you to an excellent blog, 2 threads back, and I'm going to link the information to that blog below. This blog is beautifully laid out, and it explores this concept of plain sewing and patching seams, making garments from scratch, a whole nother world of stitching that young women had to experience in their growing up years in the 1800s and into the 1900s as well. All right, next I'd like to share with you the progress on my projects. I wanted to have Mary Snow completed. She's very close. I've been stitching Mary Snow on 40 count Lakeside. I've been using a number 28 tapestry needle, and I'm stitching her with a Vera Soie. She's almost done. I've started to add some of the finer details. I'm putting my name in the year in the area where it's going to be folded back for the framing. I did add Queen Elizabeth's name and, well, just her ER2 because I was watching her funeral as I stitched this swan. And so I wanted to add that there. And then I added my initials here next to the woman. Now, I don't think anyone's going to think this is an original. I know I've had people ask me, why do you stitch samplers? People are going to think you're trying to make a forgery. Well, I think based on the linen and the threads, this one for sure is obviously so common. So many people have stitched it. But, you know, forgeries do happen. And I'm trying to reinterpret this and make this meaningful to me. So I added some elements to it to make it my own. I had a lot of fun. Now, you may be looking at this and if you've stitched it, you're probably saying, Susan, something's not quite right. Yes, when I stitched this last little crown, and I still have the flowers, and then I should be done. But, however, when I stitched this last little crown, I realized I was off by 4 threads on the swan. It's up too high. It's up 4 threads too high. Do I unpick it and redo it? Do I leave it as is? What do I do? That's my dilemma. I would love to know how you handle a situation like that when you're this close to the end. What do you do? I have plans for this. In the next video, I'll share those plans with you, but please let me know what you would do. Anyway, that's been an enjoyable stitch. This will be done, and I'll show you where I'm going next with it. The other project that I worked on was my Simple Harmonies box. Now, I'm going to bring all this over here. Simple Harmonies is a beautiful project that was gifted to our stitching community by Katie Strachan at Katie Strachan Embroidery. It's based on this chart by Jacob of Modern Folk Embroidery. It's been adapted by Katie to fit a box. So this time, I'm going to show you my box. And I don't know, I think if you check in with Katie, you can find out about the box, the status of the boxes and purchasing them. I purchased mine off of Amazon as soon as she let us know about the project. I don't know the current update on that. You'll have to check with her. I will link her below as well. I began drafting out my pattern. This is going to fit exactly on the top of that wood. Now, people have asked me, why in the world have I started using a hoop? This is why. My stitching for this project has to fit exactly into this space right here. I just have a little start. This is stitched on Legacy linen, 38 count, using Goblins, and I've fallen in love with Goblins. I'm enjoying it so much. This is the box back that I've drafted, so I've just started walking down that road. I did order a paper because this box is lined or has a piece of lining with paper. I'm not sure if this is going to work. I just went for it because it had a hint of blue. I want to have a surprise. When you open the box, I want it to be a surprise. The enhancement on this is silver, and so I think this might be too gold. Don't worry, it'll be used for something else. It's gorgeous, gorgeous paper. So that's where I am with that project. Just keep continuing to walk down that road. And then the last thing I just played with a teeny bit is Mary Brutnell. Here, let me move this out of the way. Mary Brutnell is something that I'm stitching because, you know, as I've said many times, I'm exploring the 1800s. She was stitched in 1839 in England. Now, Rebecca of Hedgerow Stitching drafted out this chart. She is the one who charted this. This is a sampler in her personal collection. She gave me pictures of the back of Mary Brutnell and said it was okay for me to share those with you. And I want to show you the back. It's because these aren't pictures in the chart. So here are a few pictures of the back of Mary Brutnell's work. And this is the original right here. So you can see she was a little girl. She was carrying threads. She was doing all kinds of things. Now, Rebecca believes that her work was originally stitched in cotton. I'm trying to reproduce a linen or a silk or a wool width that would have been, or I'm trying to interpret this with the linen, silk, or wool that would have been really common during that time period. So I'm also using Goblins. So here's my gorgeous threads, and I finally received the last colors. So even though I really shouldn't have done much with it, and I didn't do much, I had to pop in a few stitches with that red. And you can see the Goblins does give a nice coverage on 30 count. This is 30 count Mariner's Map by Legacy Linen, and it's a very forgiving and a peaceful stitch. I am using on that a number 10 short beading needle, and I think I've talked about this earlier on in the year, that I'm trying to be really deliberate about my linen, my floss, and my needle choices, and just really playing around and experimenting and finding that perfect fit. I have used Katie's tutorials for that. I've also listened to Kathy Needle in a Haystack. I've spoken with other shop owners. I mean, this is just kind of my journey of really honing in on what works. So that's what I did. I had a finish of a doll quilt. Move this over. This doll quilt was the blocks in this. These blocks here were part of an exchange. Let me see if I can move the camera out just a little bit here. So everyone pulled these little tiny 1-inch squares from their stash, from their collection, and made these 16 patch blocks, and then we swapped them. And I set mine in different matters and gave it a sashing. And it's just a fun memory of some friends. Everyone set theirs differently. And let's see, on the back, I just want to show you too that your label can be very, very simple. And so I just used in leftover block, and in the lighter places I wrote the information. I wrote my name, I wrote the name of the person I was doing this with, what it was, and just the location and the date. It's just very simple. So I like this because I like the strong matter colors, and I like that with the black. And I like it because it's a memory, and I do really like things set on point. It seems to add a lot of interest to the project. So there's that little 16 patch exchange quilt. She really doesn't have a name. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I do want to celebrate my 2-year floss tube anniversary. Can't believe I've been doing this for 2 years. With a couple of giveaways. One will be related to quilts, and one will be related to samplers. And if you're like me and you like both of these endeavors, you are welcome to try to win both of them. You can go ahead and try for both. There have been some issues with floss tubers and bots and giveaways, so please be careful in your response. Do not use the word giveaway. Do not use the word prize. Make sure you're 18 or over. Please be a subscriber. I would love to share some of my stitchy goodness with you. So for the quilt giveaway, I'd like you to use the word batting, B-A-T-T-I-N-G, batting. I'm going to give away a curated roll of fabrics from 1840 era and a book called Glorious American Quilts. And these are quilts from the American Folk Art Museum. And it's beautiful, wonderful eye candy. And I think if you enjoy quilts, if you enjoy textiles, you'll enjoy this. So giveaway number 1 is this, and the keyword, the word I will be searching for is batting. All right, and then the next giveaway is sampler stitching related. And I have this chart by Blackbird Designs. I believe it's an interpretation of an antique. I have a piece of R&R burnished gold linen, 36 count. And it's a fat, well, let's see, it's 27 by 36, and I have a collection of silks. And all of those 3 items will be in the giveaway for the samplers, and the keyword for that is flax. So use flax in your comment if you would like to win that. I'm, again, so excited to have been on this adventure with you for 2 years. Next time, I'm going to do some research on how to fully finish Mary Snow. She will be done. I will be sharing with you what I found out and what I'm going to do. I'm going to share another quilt. I'll have, again, progress on my projects, and I have some books to share with you as well. And so in the meantime, until I see you again, make time for stitching. Bye-bye.